I almost didn't stay for the final reading that afternoon. It felt like the case was already over. Most people in the room thought the same thing. You could feel it in the air, that quiet kind of restlessness that sets in when everyone has already made up their mind about how something is going to end. She had been sitting there the entire time, quietly, barely speaking, barely even looking up from the table in front of her. And if I'm being honest, no one was taking her seriously. Not the lawyers on the other side, not the people sitting in the gallery behind me, not the young clerk who kept shuffling papers near the back door like he had somewhere else to be, and certainly not the man sitting across from her at the opposite table, who had been leaning back in his chair since 9 o'clock that morning, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from knowing, or at least believing, that you've already won. I remember shifting in my seat thinking this would be over in a few more minutes. Just sign some papers. Just read the final statement. Just close the folder and call it a day. But then, the judge reached the last page, and something about the way she paused before she read it felt different. Before I tell you what happened next, if you enjoy real courtroom stories like this, stories about people who were overlooked, dismissed, and then something happened that nobody expected, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It means more than you know. And stay with me, because what happened in the final moments of that hearing, no one in that room was prepared for. Phew, not even me. I want to take you back to how that day began. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. I remember that because the trees outside the courthouse had just started to turn, those deep reds and burnt oranges that you only get in fall, and there was a sharp chill in the air when I walked up the front steps. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. Not really. A friend of mine had asked me to come along for support. She was connected to the case in a small way, not directly involved, but close enough to someone who was that she felt she needed to be present. So I came along, as a witness, as company, as someone who had no idea what he was actually walking into. The courthouse was one of those older buildings, high ceilings, marble floors, the kind of place where every footstep echoes a little too loud, the kind of building that makes you feel, the moment you walk in, that something serious happens here. And that day, something serious did. We took our seats in the public gallery, the second row, just behind the low wooden railing that separates the observers from the participants, close enough to see faces, close enough to hear voices without straining, close enough, as it turned out, to watch everything unfold. The courtroom was not full, maybe 30 people in total, including the legal teams, a handful of observers, a woman near the back who was writing everything down in a spiral notebook, a man in a gray suit near the aisle who I later learned was a financial advisor involved in some part of the proceedings, and at the front, the two tables. On the left, her, a woman, I'd say in her late 60s, small frame, gray hair pulled neatly back. She was wearing a plain navy cardigan, the kind of thing you'd wear to church on a cool Sunday morning, and she had a single manila folder in front of her on the table. No legal team sitting beside her. Just her and that folder. On the right, him. A man, I'd guess somewhere in his early 70s, larger build, silver hair, perfectly combed. He was wearing a dark suit that looked expensive, the kind that doesn't wrinkle, the kind that someone pressed very carefully before he put it on. And beside him sat two attorneys. Two. And a paralegal. 3 people on his side of that table, files stacked neatly in front of them, organized, professional, ready. And on her side, just the folder, and her hands folded quietly on top of it. Looking back now, I think that image, that single image of her sitting alone across from all of that, is what stayed with me the most. But at the time, I didn't give it much thought. I assumed she had made a choice, maybe to represent herself, or maybe she had a lawyer who was late, or maybe she simply couldn't afford one. Whatever the reason, at the time, it made the whole situation feel even more lopsided. The judge entered at 9:15. She was a woman, the judge, probably in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a calm, no-nonsense manner that immediately settled the room. When she sat down, everyone else sat down too. The quiet that followed felt deliberate. She looked at both tables, said good morning, opened her own folder, and then she looked, briefly, at the woman sitting alone on the left. Just a glance. Professional. Nothing you could read into. The case, as I understood it from what came before, was a dispute. A serious one. Over property. Over money. over what had been promised and what had actually been given. I won't pretend I knew all the details walking in. I didn't. But the basic outline was this. The woman sitting alone had been married to the man on the other side for over 40 years. They had divorced some years prior. There had been an agreement, a legal agreement, about how certain assets would be divided. And now she was claiming that the agreement had not been honored, that something had been left out, or taken, or perhaps never truly given to her at all. His lawyers were there to argue that everything had been handled correctly, that the settlement was final, that there was nothing left to discuss. And from where I was sitting, they seemed to have a strong case. Document after document was presented. Records, financial statements, signed agreements, dates, numbers, everything neat and orderly and complete. His lead attorney, a tall man with a confident voice who pronounced every word with the kind of precision that comes from years of practice, walked the judge through each item methodically. And the whole time, the woman on the left sat still. She didn't interrupt. She didn't write anything down. She just listened. And occasionally she would look down at that manila folder in front of her. At one point I noticed this. The man across from her leaned over to his attorney and said something quietly. And the attorney nodded. And there was just the briefest flash of a smile. Nothing obvious. Nothing you'd call rude. Just that small, private expression of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. And at the time, honestly, I thought the same thing. There came a moment, maybe 40 minutes into the proceedings, when the judge looked toward the left table. "Ma'am," she said, calm, even. "Do you have anything you'd like to present?" The room shifted. Not dramatically, not the way you'd see in a movie, just that small adjustment that happens when everyone in a room turns their attention in the same direction at the same time. She looked up, quietly, and for the first time, I saw her face clearly. She had kind eyes. That's the first thing I noticed. Tired eyes. The kind that carry weight, but kind underneath it all. There were lines around them. Around her mouth, too. The kind that come from years of living, not just years of age. She straightened slightly in her chair. "Yes," she said, "I do." Her voice was soft, steady, but soft. The kind of voice you have to lean in to hear. She reached for the folder. "Now, here is where I want you to pay attention, because what happened next seemed, in the moment, like almost nothing, like a small procedural detail, like one of those things that gets swallowed up by the routine of the day. But it wasn't. She opened the folder, and inside, from what I could see from the second row, there were just a few pages, maybe 5 or 6, not a thick stack, not a wall of documents like the other side had presented, just a few pages. She placed them on the table in front of her, and she said, again, in that quiet voice, "I have one document I'd like to submit." The attorney on the other side, the tall one, glanced at his colleagues. There was something in that glance, a kind of casual dismissal, like, "Whatever this is, it won't change anything." The judge nodded. "Please bring it forward." And she did. She stood, slowly, the way people do when their joints protest a little, and she walked to the clerk's table and she placed the pages there. Then she walked back, sat down, folded her hands again, and waited. At the time, I didn't think much of it, and that, looking back, is almost the most important detail of all. If you're still with me right now, I want to pause for just a moment, because what I'm about to describe, the next part of what happened in that courtroom, is the part I've thought about almost every day since, and I want to make sure you don't miss it. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, hit that like button, because what comes next in this story is the reason I felt I had to share it. Now, back to that document. The clerk passed the pages to the judge. She glanced at them briefly, just a first pass, the way a judge does before she reads something properly. She set them down in front of her, removed her glasses from the chain around her neck, put them on, and that's when I noticed the lead attorney on the other side had leaned forward slightly, just enough, dietly. At the time, I didn't know what that meant, but my eyes caught it, and somewhere in the back of my mind, something filed it away. The judge began to read, silently at first. The room was quiet. Now you have to understand what courthouse quiet sounds like. It's not like regular quiet. It's a specific kind of silence that has weight to it. You become aware of the smallest things, the hum of the lighting overhead, the faint rustle of someone shifting in their seat, the occasional sound of a pen clicking in someone's hand. That was the kind of quiet that filled the room while the judge read. She turned the first page. then the second. The attorney across the room, the tall one, cleared his throat. A small sound. Maybe nothing. Maybe not nothing. She turned the third page. And this is when something changed. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, not in words, not precisely. But anyone who has spent time in rooms where serious decisions get made will understand what I mean when I say. The atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. Not with any sound or motion you could point to. Just a change, like when a room that was warm begins to cool, and you feel it before you can explain it. The judge had stopped moving. She was still, reading, but still in a way that was different from the still of just a moment before. I leaned forward just slightly in my seat. I didn't realize I was doing it at first. I want to go back for a moment. Back to earlier in the morning, because there's something I haven't told you yet. Something that matters. Before the document was submitted, there had been a stretch of about 20 minutes during the proceedings where the other side's attorney had been addressing the judge directly, going through the settlement terms line by line, explaining why each item had been handled correctly, why nothing was owed. And during that 20 minutes, the woman at the left table had been almost entirely ignored. Not maliciously, not loudly, just the way people ignore someone when they've already decided that person doesn't have anything important to say. At one point she had tried to speak. She had raised her hand slightly, a small, almost tentative gesture, and the attorney had kept talking. The judge, to her credit, noticed. She held up one hand. "Let her speak," she said. The attorney stopped, politely, the way a person stops when they're not really worried about the interruption. And the woman had said, softly as always, "I just want to note that the date on that document doesn't match." "We'll get to that," the attorney had said before she could finish. The judge had looked at him, a brief look, and then she had said, very calmly, "Let her finish." And the woman had finished her sentence, something about a date, something about a discrepancy. And then the attorney had moved on, as if what she'd said was a small thing, a technical detail, something that didn't matter in the larger picture. And everyone in that room, including, I admit, me, had let it pass. But she hadn't let it pass. She had written something down, quietly. And then she had reached into that manila folder, and that's when she had pulled out those few pages and placed them on the table in front of her, waiting. Back to the judge. She was still reading. Fourth page now. The attorney on the right side of the room had leaned over to his colleague, the junior attorney, a younger man who had barely spoken all morning, and said something, very quietly. I couldn't hear it, but I watched the junior attorney's face, and something crossed it. A flicker, just for a second. Not worry, exactly. Not alarm, but something. The judge turned to the fifth page. She paused. Now, this pause. I need to describe it correctly, because it was not a dramatic pause. It wasn't the pause of someone who has just been shocked. It was slower than that, more considered. It was the pause of someone who is making sure they understand what they are reading before they say a single word. Dietly. And that told me, even before I knew what was on those pages, that whatever she was reading, it mattered. She set the last page down. She looked up, not at the attorneys, not at the room, at her, at the woman sitting quietly at the left table, with her hands folded on top of the now empty folder. And for just a moment, a brief, impossible-to-read moment, they looked at each other. And then the judge looked down again at the pages. I want to stop here for just a moment, because I know some of you are leaning in right now, wondering what was in those pages, wondering what the judge was reading, wondering why that woman, who nobody in that room had taken seriously, had that specific look on her face. And I'm going to tell you, I promise. But first, if you're finding this story as compelling as I did when I lived it, please take 2 seconds right now. Like this video. Subscribe if you haven't. Share it with someone you think would want to hear this, because the next part of this story is the part that changed how I think about courtrooms, about documents, about what happens when someone who has been dismissed has been preparing for a very long time. Let's continue. The judge addressed the room. Her voice, when she spoke, was measured, careful, the way a person speaks when they want to be sure every word lands correctly. I'm going to read a portion of what has been submitted into evidence, she said. I want both parties to listen carefully. The attorney on the right straightened. His 2 colleagues exchanged a glance. The woman on the left did not move. She just sat, still, waiting. Now, the document itself, I would learn later, was not complicated in its language. It was actually very simple. That was part of what made it so powerful. It was a letter, written by hand, and it was old, not ancient, but old, dated, from what I would piece together later, some 12 years before that morning in that courtroom. 12 years. The judge began to read. She read slowly, and as she read, I watched the room the way I had learned to watch rooms in my life, not looking at any one thing, but letting my attention spread wide so nothing important escaped me. I watched the attorney on the right. His posture had changed, barely, but it had changed. I watched the junior attorney beside him. He was looking at the table. I watched the man himself, the one who had been leaning back all morning, easy and confident. He had stopped leaning back. I watched the woman at the left table. She had not moved, not her hands, not her posture, not her expression. She was very, very still. And I thought, in that moment, watching all of this, that this was a woman who had been waiting, not just this morning, not just through this case, for a long time, for this exact moment. And then the judge reached the last section of the letter, and that is when everything changed. I have gone back and forth about how to describe this part, because the truth is, it's not what you might expect. There was no shouting, no dramatic revelation that the whole room gasped at, no moment where someone stood up and pointed a finger. It was quieter than, and in some ways, because of that, it was more powerful. The judge read the final paragraph of the letter, and at the end of that paragraph, there was a line, one line. I won't repeat it word for word, because those words belong to that moment, in that room, to the people directly involved. But I can tell you what it said, what it meant, what it confirmed. The letter, written in that man's own handwriting 12 years ago, contained a promise, not a vague promise, not a general expression of good intention. A specific promise, a specific commitment about a specific piece of property, one that had not appeared in any of the settlement documents presented that morning by his attorneys, one that had been, according to the paperwork on the right side of the room, never discussed, never agreed upon, never part of the arrangement. But there it was, in his handwriting, signed by him, witnessed, and this is the part that made the room go very, very quiet, witnessed by a third party whose name was familiar to the judge, whose name, it turned out, was familiar to the other attorneys as well. And the final line of that letter stated, clearly and without any room for interpretation, that in the event of any separation of assets, this particular property and the income from it would belong to her, not to be divided, not to be negotiated, to her, entirely. The judge finished reading. She set the pages down. She did not look up immediately. No one in that room made a sound. Not the attorneys, not the observers behind me, not the clerk near the back door, not the man in the gray suit, not even the man at the right table. I have been in quiet rooms before. I have sat in hospitals at difficult hours. I have been in churches during moments of deep grief. I have sat in small rooms where people waited for news they weren't sure they wanted to receive. But this particular silence was its own thing. It had a texture to it. The judge set her glasses back on the chain around her neck, a small, deliberate movement, and then she looked up at both tables, taking them in together. Dietly. This document, she said, was not included in the materials submitted by the respondent's counsel. She said it quietly, not as an accusation, as an observation, as a fact. The attorney on the right, the tall one, the confident one, the one who had spoken all morning with such ease, opened his mouth and closed it again. "Is this document known to you?" the judge asked. He looked at his client, and the man at the right table, the one who had been leaning back all morning, the one who had smiled that small smile, the one who had looked like he had already won, looked down at the table in front of him. "I'll need a moment," the attorney said. "Take your time," the judge replied. And then something happened that I did not expect. She, the woman at the left table, turned her head, just slightly, and she looked at the man across from her, not with anger, not with triumph, not with anything that felt like victory in the way we usually imagine victory. Dietly. She looked at him the way someone looks at a person they used to know, at a distance, with something that was perhaps closer to sadness than to satisfaction. And he didn't look back. What happened next unfolded slowly, the way real things do, as opposed to the way movies make them happen. There was a recess, 20 minutes. During that time, the attorneys on the right side moved to a corner and spoke in low, urgent voices. Papers were shuffled. Phones were checked. The paralegal typed something rapidly on a small tablet. I stayed in my seat. Most of the gallery did the same. The woman at the left table did not move for the first several minutes. She sat exactly as she had all morning, hands folded, back straight. And then, very quietly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small water bottle. She opened it. She took a slow sip. That's it. That's all she did. Dietly. And somehow, that small, ordinary action, a woman taking a sip of water in the middle of one of the most significant moments of her life, said more than anything else I witnessed that day. My friend, sitting beside me, leaned over and whispered, "Did I understand that correctly?" "I think so," I said. "She had it the whole time," she said. Yes, she had it the whole time. During that recess, I talked briefly to a man sitting near the aisle, an older gentleman who seemed to know more about the background of the case than I did. He spoke quietly, carefully. What he told me filled in some of the pieces I had been missing. The property in question, he said, was not a small thing. It was a piece of land, commercial land, that had appreciated significantly over the years since the divorce. The income from it had been going entirely to one party, and that party, for the past several years, had been the man at the right table, quietly, without apparently any legal right to it. The letter, the handwritten letter, had been written during a period when the couple was in the early stages of their difficulties, before any formal legal proceedings, before any attorneys were involved. It had been written, the man told me, as a personal commitment, a private acknowledgment, and she had kept it for 12 years. Did she always plan to use it? I asked him. He thought about that for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "she hoped she'd never have to." The recess ended. Everyone returned to their positions. The judge came back in, sat down, looked at both tables again. She asked the lead attorney for the respondent if he had anything to say regarding the document. There was a long pause, the longest I had heard from that table all day. And then the attorney said, in a voice that had lost some of its earlier confidence, that his client would need time to consult with counsel before responding formally. The judge nodded. She said something about scheduling, about next steps, about what would be required from each party going forward. And I understood, even without knowing the precise legal language, what this meant. The case was not over. Not today. There would be more proceedings, more dates, more rooms like this one. But something had changed, fundamentally and permanently. That document was now part of the record. That letter, in his handwriting, with his signature, witnessed by a third party, was now sitting in the clerk's files. It existed officially. It could not be made to unexist. And the woman who had been sitting quietly all morning, the woman that no one had taken seriously, had known exactly what she was carrying in that manila folder. She had known the whole time. We filed out slowly when the session ended. The marble floors echoed with footsteps. The afternoon light was coming through the tall windows in long slanted bars, the kind of autumn light that turns everything golden and a little melancholy. I walked slowly, thinking. I saw her briefly, near the side door. She was putting on her coat, a plain wool coat, the same navy as her cardigan. She had the folder tucked under her arm, empty now. She was speaking quietly with someone, a younger woman, maybe a daughter, maybe a niece, who had appeared from somewhere during the recess. The younger woman had her hand on her arm. She looked up once toward the windows, and for a moment I saw her face in that autumn light. And what I saw there was not triumph. It wasn't relief exactly, either. It was something more like the expression of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has finally been able to set it down. Not because the weight is gone, not because everything is resolved, but because the truth is out now, because the thing that was real is now acknowledged to be real. And sometimes that is its own kind of rest. I've thought about that day many times since. I've thought about the way rooms make assumptions, about how we read people in an instant, the way they're dressed, the way they sit, who's with them and who isn't, and we construct a story around them, a story about how much they matter, about what they know, about what they're capable of. And I've thought about how often those stories are wrong. That woman had walked into a room where the scales were visibly tipped against her. She had no legal team. She had a single folder. She spoke in a soft voice that people talked over. And for most of that morning, the room had written its own ending, had assumed it already knew how this would go. But she had never assumed that. She had never walked into that room thinking the outcome was already decided. She had walked in with a letter, and she had waited, quietly, patiently, through every document they presented, through every number and every date and every signed agreement, through the looks and the leaning back and the small private smiles. She had waited for the right moment, and when it came, she was ready. I want to tell you the one image that I keep coming back to. Not the judge reading, not the attorney's posture changing, not the silence that fell over that room. It's the folder, that plain manila folder, the kind you can buy for $1 at any office store, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that sits quietly on a table and waits. 5 or 6 pages inside it. That's all. 12 years of waiting. 12 years of knowing. 12 years of holding on to something that the other side probably assumed had been forgotten, or lost, or never existed at all. 5 or 6 pages, and one line at the end. One line that changed everything. I learned more about the outcome in the weeks that followed through my friend who remained connected to the case. The proceedings did continue as the judge had indicated. There were additional hearings. Motions were filed. The document was reviewed extensively by both parties. But the fundamental reality of what that letter stated, what it confirmed, in the original handwriting of the man who had written it, could not be undone. Several months later, an agreement was reached. The property was transferred. The back income, the money that had been flowing in one direction for years, was addressed. I don't know the exact terms. That's not mine to know. But I know what my friend told me. She said the woman was okay, that she had moved, that she had bought a small house in a town where she had family, that she had a garden now, and that she seemed, for the first time in a long time, at peace. I think about what that deed taught me. It taught me not to read a room too quickly, not to make up my mind about someone based on the first impression they give, or the first impression others have decided for them. It taught me that being quiet is not the same as being weak, that waiting is not the same as losing, that preparation, when it's done in silence over a long period of time, can look like nothing at all from the outside, right up until the moment it matters. And it taught me something about documentation, about the importance of a record, about what happens when someone writes something down and signs their name to it, and another person has the wisdom and the patience to keep it. 12 years is a long time to hold on to a piece of paper. But she knew something important. She knew that truth has a way of outlasting the people who try to bury it. And she was right. I want to speak to you directly for just a moment, because I know that some of you listening to this story, some of you who are here right now, are carrying something. Maybe not a legal document, maybe not a courtroom dispute, but something. Quietly. A situation where you feel like you're not being taken seriously, where the room has already decided how it thinks things are going to go, where the other side has more resources, more people, more visible power. And maybe you have something in your own folder, something you know is true, something that hasn't been acknowledged yet, something you've been holding on to for longer than feels fair. I don't know your situation. I don't know the details, but I know this. The room being against you right now is not the same as the outcome being against you. Quietly. She understood that. She kept her folder. She kept her letter. She kept her patience. And she waited for the right page. I walked out of that courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The trees were still turning. The air was still cold. My footsteps still echoed on those marble floors. But I was different. In some small way that's hard to fully explain. I had gone in as an observer, just along for company. Just watching, and I had ended up watching one of the quietest, most powerful things I have ever seen in my life. A woman who no one took seriously, walking into a room with a single folder, sitting quietly through everything, and then, when the moment came, placing 5 or 6 pages on a table, and waiting. And that final line, the one the judge read in a room that had gone completely silent, wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with any announcement. It was just true. It had always been true. It was just waiting to be read. Before I go today, I want to leave you with a few things to think about. First, is there someone in your life right now who is being overlooked? Someone whose voice is being talked over, whose concerns are being dismissed, whose quiet preparation is being mistaken for weakness? Second, is there something you know to be true, something you've been holding on to that the room around you hasn't acknowledged yet? And third, what does patience look like when it's practiced not out of resignation, but out of certainty? That woman knew what was in her folder. She wasn't waiting because she was afraid. She was waiting because she understood something that the room did not. She understood that you don't have to prove something loudly to prove it completely. Thank you for staying with me through this story, from the beginning all the way to the final line. If this moved you in some way, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something or someone or some moment in your own life, please leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who's sitting in a difficult room of their own right now, share this with them. Dietly. Sometimes the most important thing we can offer another person is the reminder that quiet preparation and a single true document can be more powerful than everything stacked against you. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.